That Christmas morning, I woke up with a heavy heart. The whole street was full of noise and laughter. Children were running up and down, women were singing as they cooked, and the smell of fried chicken and stew filled the air. I sat quietly in my small kitchen and looked at the little pot on my stove. Inside it was plain white rice with just a bit of salt and margarine. That was all I could afford that year. As I stirred the rice, I remembered the days when my husband, Sunday, was alive. He used to buy a big chicken every Christmas. Our son Chike would run around the house dancing and shouting that Christmas had come. Those days were sweet, but all that joy ended when my husband died. Since then, life had not smiled at me again. Now Chike was in Lagos trying to find work. It had been 2 years since I saw him. Sometimes he called and promised to send money, but the money never came. I didn't blame him much. I knew Lagos was not easy. But still, my heart ached. A mother's heart never stops worrying. I sat down on my small stool and whispered a short prayer. I told God that even though my food was small, I was grateful. I told him to bless anyone who had nothing at all. I scooped a small portion of the rice into a plate and was about to eat when I heard a knock on my door. At first I ignored it. I thought maybe it was one of the children playing outside. But the knock came again, this time weaker, like someone using the last of their strength. I stood up slowly and opened the door. Standing there was a small boy. He looked about 10 years old. His clothes were dirty and torn, and his lips were dry. His eyes were red like someone who had cried for long. He looked up at me and said softly, "Mummy, please, I'm hungry." My heart broke as I looked at him. I didn't even have enough for myself. My rice was small. My pot was small. My stomach was already singing. But I couldn't send that boy away. Something in me couldn't let him go. I looked back at the plate on my table. Then I looked at him again. I called him inside and told him to sit. I went to the kitchen, divided the rice into 2, and gave him the bigger portion. He started eating quickly, like someone who had not seen food for days. I watched him quietly, feeling tears in my eyes. When he finished, he wiped his mouth with his hand and said, "Thank you, Ma." His voice was small but full of meaning. Then he stood up and walked out. I watched him until he disappeared into the street. That day, I sat alone and finished my small share of rice, but somehow that food tasted sweeter than any Christmas food I had eaten before. I didn't know it then, but that small plate of rice was going to return to me one day in a way I could never imagine. After that Christmas, life became harder for me. The little money I made from selling roasted groundnut finished, and I could no longer stand long hours in the sun to sell again. My knees began to pain me, and sometimes I could not walk well. Every day, I prayed for strength to survive one more day. Months turned into years, and Chike still did not come home. Sometimes I heard that he was doing well in Lagos, other times that he was still looking for a job. I waited for him every December, thinking he would come home for Christmas, but he never did. Every year, I would sweep the house, wash his old clothes, and keep his room clean just in case he came back. But the room stayed empty. My neighbours tried to be kind at first. They would greet me and sometimes send me small food when they cooked plenty. But as time went on, they began to avoid me. Some said I was bad luck. Some said I was too proud because I never begged. But it was not pride. I just could not bring myself to beg for food when I still had hands to cook and legs to walk, even if they shook while walking. One evening, as I was washing my plate outside, my landlord came. He said the house had been sold and that the new owner wanted everyone to move out. I begged him to give me time, but he said he could not help me. I sat down and cried. I did not know where I would go. My husband's people had long forgotten me, and I had no other child to call my own. Some nights I went to bed hungry. Some days I cooked just pap and drank it slowly so it could fill my stomach. My sight started getting weak. When I looked at things far away, they became blurry. Sometimes I fell while walking. Still, I told myself that God had not forgotten me. One day, I was coming back from the borehole when I suddenly felt dizzy. I dropped my bucket and held the wall. The next thing I knew, everything went dark. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying on a bed I'd never seen before. The air smelled clean, and the sheets were white. A nurse stood beside me smiling. She said I had been brought to the hospital. I tried to sit up, but my body felt weak. I told her I had no money, that I didn't even know who brought me there. She smiled and said I should rest, that my bills had already been paid. I was confused. Who would pay my bills? I had no one. I asked her who the person was, and she said he left a message. She leaned close to me and whispered the message. Christmas rice, never forgotten. I lay there quietly, my heart beating fast. I didn't understand what she meant, but deep inside, something began to stir. A memory. A feeling. Something from long ago. I lay on that hospital bed thinking of those words again and again. Christmas rice, never forgotten. My heart beat fast as I tried to remember where I had heard something like that before. Then my mind went back to that Christmas years ago, the one when a small boy knocked on my door. The boy I gave my rice to. Could it be him? No, it couldn't. That was a long time ago. He was just a child. How could he be the one? I shook my head and told myself to rest. Maybe it was all a mistake. The next morning, the nurse came with my breakfast, hot tea and bread with egg. I had not seen egg in months. I thanked her and asked again who brought me here. She smiled and said the man would come to see me himself. My heart started to beat fast again. The whole day passed slowly. I kept looking at the door, waiting. I didn't even touch the food they brought later because I couldn't stop thinking. Evening came and the nurse entered again. This time, she was smiling more than usual. She said, "Mama, the doctor is here to see you." I looked at the door as a tall man in a white coat walked in. He was neat, handsome, and his face carried a kind of peace that filled the room. He came close to my bed and smiled at me like he had known me all his life. "Mama Ifeoma," he said, "you may not remember me. Years ago, you shared your Christmas rice with a small boy who was hungry. That boy was me. I felt my mouth open, but no sound came out. I stared at him, trying to see the boy in the man's face. Then I saw it. The eyes. Those same eyes that had looked at me that day. Hungry, tired, and lost. Only now they were full of life. Tears filled my eyes as I held his hand. He sat beside me and told me everything. How he had lost his parents when he was small. How he used to beg on the streets to eat. How that one Christmas meal I gave him hope to live again. He said he promised himself that day that when he grew up, he would help anyone who was hungry. He said that small plate of rice changed his life. As he spoke, my tears dropped on my wrapper. I couldn't stop them. I didn't know that what I did that day mattered so much. I just saw a hungry child and gave him what I had. He said he became a doctor and had been looking for me since he came back to town. When he found out that I was sick and living alone, he decided to take care of me. I looked at him again, my heart full. I told him that God had used him to remember me. He smiled and said it was not God remembering me, but God showing me that kindness never dies. I lay back on the bed, my body weak, but my heart strong. For the first time in many years, I slept that night without fear or hunger, with tears of joy still wet on my face. The next few weeks in the hospital felt like a dream. Every morning, nurses checked on me, smiling and calling me Mama, as if I was their own mother. The doctor, whose name I now knew as Dr. Emeka, came to see me every day. He brought fruits, medicine, and sometimes just came to sit and talk. He told me stories about how he went to school with the help of a church scholarship, how he studied medicine, and how he now owned that very hospital. I listened with pride in my heart, thinking of how far the hungry boy I once fed had come. One afternoon, he came into my room holding a big brown envelope. He sat on the chair beside my bed and said, "Mama, I have something for you." I looked at him, waiting. He opened the envelope and brought out some papers. He said he had rented a small, comfortable apartment for me close to the hospital and that a woman would come every morning to cook and help me with my medicine. I covered my face with my hands and started crying. Nobody had ever done anything like that for me before. The next day, they took me in an ambulance to the new house. When we arrived, I could not believe my eyes. It was small but clean and beautiful. The walls were painted cream and there was a soft bed with new bed sheets. On the table sat a small gas cooker, a bag of rice, beans, and some tins of milk. For a moment, I stood there not knowing what to say. It felt like I was dreaming, like I had entered another life. Days passed and I started to get stronger. My legs still pained me sometimes, but I could walk around slowly. The nurse who came every day became like a daughter to me. I smiled again after so many years. I even started cooking small meals, and sometimes I gave food to the children who played around my compound. But one day, as I sat outside under the mango tree in front of the house, I saw a young man walking toward me. His face looked familiar. When he came closer, I realized it was Chike, my son. He looked older, tired, and ashamed. His eyes were red as he knelt before me. He said he heard that I was sick but did not know how to face me because he had failed me. I could see pain in his face, the kind of pain that only guilt can bring. I told him to stand up. I was weak, but I reached out and held his hand. I told him that life had already punished him enough, that all I wanted was to see him again. He started crying and said he had been lost, that Lagos had swallowed him, and he didn't know how to find his way home. I told him that home never moves, that it stays in the same place waiting for those who are ready to return. Dr. Emeka later came that same evening and met us together. He smiled and said it was a good thing to see mother and son united again. Chike looked at him and said, "Thank you for saving my mother." I watched them shake hands, and my eyes filled with tears again. I felt like the years of suffering were finally ending, like peace had come back to my house after a long journey away. That December came faster than I expected. The Harmattan wind was strong that year, but my heart was warm. For the first time in many years, I was looking forward to Christmas again. My new house had become a home. Chike was living with me now, helping me with small things around the house. He found a small job at a printing shop not too far away. Every evening when he came back, we sat outside under the mango tree, talking about old times. Sometimes I would laugh until tears came from my eyes. Those were the kind of days I thought I would never see again. One morning, about a week before Christmas, Dr. Emeka came to visit. He brought a big sack of rice, 2 live chickens, a gallon of groundnut oil, and some new clothes for me. I did not even know what to say. He smiled and told me that this Christmas I would not eat alone. He said the children from the street would come and that he had already told some of his hospital workers to bring their own children too. He said I had given him 1 plate of rice when I had almost nothing, and now it was his turn to make sure I never lacked again. I spent the next few days cooking and preparing. The nurse helped me clean the compound and decorate the small veranda with ribbons. Chike fetched water, and we both washed the chairs outside. I could not stop smiling. My heart was full of joy and peace. I felt alive again. On Christmas morning, people started coming early. The sound of laughter filled the compound. The smell of jollof rice and fried meat filled the air. Children ran around, playing and shouting. I sat under the mango tree wearing my new wrapper and head tie. My eyes were full of tears, but this time they were tears of joy. I watched the children eat, their mouths red from stew, their hands oily but happy. Dr. Emeka came and sat beside me. He said, "Mama, this is the same way you fed me years ago. You may have forgotten, but I never did." I looked at him, smiled, and placed my hand on his. I told him that sometimes one small act of kindness can change a whole life. He nodded and said that kindness travels faster than we think. As the sun began to set, Chike brought me a plate of rice and meat. I took 1 spoonful and looked around me. The same smell of rice that once reminded me of loneliness now smelled like hope. I closed my eyes and thanked God for everything. That night, after everyone had gone, I sat outside again, looking at the stars. The compound was quiet, except for the sound of crickets. I thought about how 1 plate of rice many years ago had come back to me as a full feast, as peace, as family. I smiled to myself and whispered softly, "A plate of rice can feed the stomach for 1 day, but the love behind it can feed a soul forever." Then I went inside, lay on my bed, and slept with a full stomach and a heart that was finally at rest.